Hi, everybody. So I'm with KCRW, which is a public radio station, the old school thing, radio. So I can tell all of you who showed up listen to public radio because you know that it's okay for us to be next to each other, just as long as we don't shake hands. Anyway, nice to see you all. I am so excited to get to interview Shivani. I was thinking that, the people who pursue public health in their education are a particular breed, because doctors focus on one person at a time, whereas the public health professional is interested in entire populations. And they see the capacity of a community and the needs, and they work with that reality. And that's why it makes perfect sense to me that Shivani Siroya would find Tala, financial services company that focuses on providing credit to those who have none and lending in emerging markets. So you hold a master's in public health and health economics from Columbia, and you studied microfinance as an analyst with the UN Populations Fund, and you later became a TED Fellow. Very impressive. So I thought you could just give us the rundown of what Tala is for those who don't know.
Sure. And I think actually your point on public health is actually kind of an interesting one, because I think part of the reason for starting Tala was, when I looked at issues in health systems around the world, I actually started to realize that we couldn't actually solve many of the problems that we wanted to, whether it was eradicating malaria or HIV and AIDS or any of these things, because in some ways there's so many systemic issues that need to actually be solved at the root before we can actually get to prevention and that kind of stuff. And so for me, it really started with this question around, how do I actually help people increase their cash flow? How do I get it so that people have disposable income so that they can even go and actually, go to the gym? They can actually go and get preventative care, those kinds of things. So that's kind of what started me on my journey. The other thing I would say is that I did a lot of firsthand research. And so I became really proximate to the problem that Tala is solving. So my background's a mix of investment banking, worked in equity research, as well as in mergers and acquisitions. That's a longer story, but in between those two experiences, that's when I worked at the UN Population Fund, and I worked across 9 different countries in West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, and individually interviewed a little over 3,500 people in person, and really got to understand, what does the daily life look like of an individual? How are they spending capital? How much are they earning? How much are they actually putting back into their kids' education, into home improvements, into medical care, all of these things? And I started to realize that people were really stuck. And it wasn't the fact that they didn't have value. It was really the fact that we couldn't see that value. We couldn't see the fact that many of these countries don't have national ID systems. There's no credit bureaus. I don't know if anyone knows this, but only 30% of the adult population worldwide is even covered by a credit bureau. So most of the world is actually not seen. And so it was kind of just like coming face to face with the reality of both the individual stories, but also just how big of a systemic problem really financial services was. And so I don't know why I decided, but I decided essentially that I couldn't stop thinking about the problem and really wanted to understand, okay, why does this exist and how could we actually prove it with really real data? Because I also realized that me going into a bank, I could keep taking customers in, and I remember one of the bank officers once said this to me, and he said, Shivani, I can do this for one person, but at some point you can't do this for millions of people. You can't be the guarantor. And so you really do need to think of a different way that is more scalable. And I was like, that's true. So I started to think about how could I find daily life data, and that's what Tala does, is essentially we developed an Android application that allows us to instantly underwrite an individual using both their mobile data, device data, and behavioral data that we can gather through our application. And what's pretty cool is 85% of our customers around the world actually get money in their accounts in under 5 minutes.
But let's talk about that data collection, because I think that, or the analysis, it's really fascinating. Give us some of the points that you use to determine who's going to, first of all, to develop credit and then to determine their risk level for lending to?
Sure. So again, I didn't know much about credit when I started, but I really started to realize it goes into 3 buckets. The first piece is the fact that you really need to understand who is it that you're lending to. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this is the person that they say they are. So it's really around identity verification. The second thing is that you really want to understand the capacity of this individual. And so the kind of data that we bring in is we're looking at transaction data. So how much do you spend on your utility bill? How much do you spend on a phone bill? All of this information in our markets, Southeast Asia, India, Mexico, Kenya, is actually all in cash. And so we had to find different proxies that are actually on the device that allow us to kind of back into cash flow. So it's all alternative data, and unless you're really looking at, again, the context of that data, you're not going to really be able to use it. And so we found different ways to back into cash flow or capacity. And then the second piece is really thinking about someone's character and their likelihood to repay. So you may have the ability to repay, but are you actually going to do it? And so that goes into behavior. And so the thing that I actually studied back in the day was really game theory and thinking about the fact that as a person actually flows through an application or their day or whatever it may be, you are actually making decisions at all points. And so what we try to do in our application is actually come up with ways that we can really get inside of our customers' heads and really understand, is this person coming in with a lot of financial anxiety? Are they a really responsible borrower? Are they reading the questions that we put in? If someone's flying through a loan application, that can actually tell you something. Are they taking the time to review or edit the data? And so that's kind of the 3 major categories that we look at.
One of the pieces how often they call others, right, in their network of people that they actually speak to.
So it's not as much about who, but it's actually thinking about it as when you use your phone, if you have a lot of outbound calls, right? In our markets, when you make a lot of outbound calls, it's actually you're getting charged for that. When you receive an incoming call, it's free. And so it's an interesting way to think about, again, how do you use liquidity? So if you are actually placing more calls instead of receiving them, you actually are potentially someone who has higher liquidity than someone else. It can also help us verify your employment. So if you say you're a business owner, you may be doing a lot of sales calls, and so we should expect that. And so it's, again, taking these disparate variables and actually putting them together and interacting them to actually piece together a customer's story.
I just kind of like the idea that if someone kept calling their mom, that they were more likely to pay back a loan. That's kind of what I thought in my mind. I don't know if that's true. So let's talk about you as a leader. I have a lot of questions about that, and I think it's interesting. I always feel 2 ways about having kind of segregated women's conferences, because I feel like these are some kick-ass women up here. Everybody should be hearing from them. But anyway, I do get it, and so I feel 2 ways about it. No shade on that. I just think that you're just running a business. You're not a woman running a business. But I want to ask you about that business and talk to you about growth. So we've heard a lot about that here, and obviously when you take on outside funding, there's this demand for growth. So can you talk about the challenges of growing?
Sure. There's many. I think, part of it is, we're in a really unique position where when we think about our growth, it's not, I wouldn't say it's just, it's of course never a linear story, but our growth is global, right? So we currently work across 4 different countries around the world. We have teams in those markets. We're about 600 people now globally, about 100 people based in Los Angeles. And so, when we think about growth, it's thinking about customer growth, revenue growth. It's thinking about market growth, so geographic expansion. It's different product growth. So how do we think about deepening the value that we provide to our customers beyond credit? And then it's also culture. So there's just a lot of different aspects of that. And then, I would think of it as if I thought about the challenges, I would think about it as how can you almost prepare yourself for it? So one of the things we talked about is really when you try to grow culture or grow your team, someone once told me this story and they said, when you cross the street in a new country, you always look, you look for instructions, right? You want to understand what side of the road the cars are coming from. And it's actually the same thing about when you join a company. If you actually don't give people something to kind of look at or give them instructions or something to assimilate into, of course, bring your own values and character. But again, if you don't have those founding principles or something that is a really core value, then in some ways, it's always going to continue to evolve and adjust and do these things. And you're not going to have that kind of steady North Star. And so that was something that, we definitely struggled with for a little bit. And, we did put in place, I would say, in year 3 for us, where we realized, okay, we're actually not just sitting around a table anymore and it's just 20 of us. It is really now, 200, 300 people. And we have to kind of create those street signs.
And what format are those street signs in?
So we have 2 things. One, we have founding principles. And the way we came up with our founding principles was really just charted the journey of Tala. So it started with believing in people. And that is our number 1 founding principle. From there, we started to realize, okay, well, we believed in people's stories, but what we did next was we actually listened and learned. And so it kind of continues along the path and ends with challenging the limits. Because we're trying to solve a problem that is affecting about 2.5 billion people around the world. So we can't just stop at serving 5 million people. And so we have to keep on going back to the beginning. So that makes it pretty simple for something for people to go back to realize, oh, wait, I'm kind of an entrepreneur within Tala. And so I have my own founding journey. Right? Anytime we launch a new country, a new product, they can actually go back to the beginning and follow that journey. And then what we did was we made it simple and we said we just have one value, one founding value, instead of multiple different things for people to remember, which is radical trust. And again, that goes back to this point where we realized we're a global company and our customers are in multiple markets. Our team is very spread out. And so if we don't trust each other, we will never be able to solve a problem this big.
So speaking of that problem, leaping back into the business side of this, who is your competition? Like, describe that universe. Was there nobody in that space before? And who are you up against?
So I would say about 5 or 6 years ago, yes, everyone understood the emerging markets opportunity, but definitely on the financial services side, most people said, or I should say traditional banks said, this is not worth it. Really, the customer is too hard to reach, too costly to reach, and the risk is just way too high, so we can never make the unit economics work. What has changed over the course of the last 5 years is, 1, there's a lot more infrastructure available in these markets, but 2, a lot of startups have actually, at the local level, in these markets, started to try to take on this problem. And so I always think of it as actually, in some ways, for us, competition is vital to solving this problem. 1, it makes us actually deliver better quality products and keeps us on our toes. But 2, again, the problem is affecting billions of people. And so we actually know Tala alone will not solve this problem. In terms of the kind of competition, I would say it's mainly coming from, I would say local startups. So we don't have a global competitor. And then we are starting to see some traditional banks in these markets actually go downstream.
So we're running out of time. I think that is a 1 minute, not a 1 hour, unfortunately. I just want to ask this last question. So a lot of you have probably read Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he did a thing on social sectors, which of course is my industry, and he talks about defining great against metrics that defy measurement. So like the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra, they decided that they would determine if they were really fulfilling their mission based on the number of standing ovations that they got. And so I was just curious, your company to me is both obviously very much for profit, but it also started with a mission. So what are the kind of standing ovations for your company?
So we look at, I would say, our impact in a few ways. When I think about, the way that we measure it, we are really looking at someone's financial health. So we define financial health in 3 categories. We think of it as, do you have the ability to get by day to day? Do you have the ability to be resilient to shocks and emergencies? And then do you have the ability to plan and prioritize future opportunities? So you can kind of think of it as, a financial ladder or financial pyramid. And so what we measure is really understanding what percentage of our customers have the capital to get through those different life stages. And what we hope is that we're actually helping increase that over time, and that they actually have different products for each of those different buckets. When I think of the standing ovation question, I actually think of it, we measure it in one other way, which is qualitatively, also thinking about financial confidence. And really thinking about, at the end of the day, if you have a high amount of anxiety, no matter what, you will face financial problems, running your business, taking care of your family in very reactive ways. And so what we also measure through surveys and individual interviews is really trying to understand, have we lowered the anxiety level of our customers, and do they feel more financially confident and more in control of, their life in general?
That's a perfect way to end it. We're at 0. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shivani, so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage, Niloo Howe.
Thank you all so much. This is in the middle of a pandemic, well, sort of pandemic, a 2-hour standing room only event, and it's why it's really my favorite event of the year. And I'm standing here with Meredith, who I know would have done anything to be here today. There was a couple of things I was really struck with as I listened to all the amazing women who are on stage today. First of all, the authenticity and the humility of the women who were here today was absolutely mind-blowing. Each of them is putting everything on the line to pursue a dream and build an amazing company. And they're showcasing stunning leadership. And there was a moment that I just want to call out for a second. So Pune Mohajer, who's sitting here, who's the founder of Hard Candy, she sort of was talking about how she had this little windfall with hard candy, and so she put it all into Tokidoki. Well, I want to tell you guys a little bit about that little windfall, right? So in 1995, with her sister, she started a company in the bathroom that upended the cosmetics industry, right? And they were creating these unique colors for nail polish. Within 18 months, they had 10 million in revenue and sold their company to LVMH. Now, how many people call that this windfall, right? Which is unexpected. It was hard work, it was vision, and it was stunning. So that's what I'm talking about when I say humility and authenticity, and we saw that. There are a few other things I learned today. I learned from Jess Ma that I didn't know faking it could be so inspiring. I also found myself kind of hoping that my daughter flunks high school. Because, if she can turn out to be even a little bit like Jess, that would be a pretty amazing thing. And, the key message that was consistent through all of these panels, be bold, be assertive, be ambitious, know what you're doing, tell your funders how they add value. Don't wait for them to tell you how they're going to add value. And I want to, I don't know if Jess is the only person who can get away with saying this, but I want to add or make a huge thank you to the, she calls you a white old guy, I think, on stage, to the white old guy who started this whole thing, Jamie Montgomery. Jamie, this was your vision. And yeah, standing O, come on, why not? Thank you so much, your vision, for putting this event on, for hosting it, for really supporting female entrepreneurs, for supporting female investors in everything you do. I'm standing between you guys and a reception in the tent. So please go enjoy yourself. Huge round of applause for all the women who are here today. And see you guys over a drink.